Water. It sustains life. The average human is approximately 70% water. You can only survive 5 days or less without water. Water is a precious resource, and the water we drink is now under threat of being privatized. At a recent United Nations conference on managing the world's limited fresh water supply, environment ministers and officials from 84 countries, including Canada, agreed with the premise that water should be paid for as a commodity, rather than be treated as an essential staple to be supplied free. French President Chirac also made claims that it would cost $400 billion to set up reliable water networks around the world, and told participants that governments could not foot the bill alone. The proposed solution was to market our water as a prime opportunity for investors. Water is the sleeping giant in the privatization debate. Corporations are ready to pounce on the potential billion-dollar profits to be realized through the sale of water. Cost-cutting governments imagine that water is the next big casino. What alarms us all are the consequences of a privatized water system, its effects on our health, on our municipal governments, and on the environment. In the UK under Margaret Thatcher, the privatization of water utilities has provided a good example of all that is bad about private sector involvement with their essential services.
The UK has a great history in terms of public utilities. We inherited from the Victorians a wonderful infrastructure, sewage, water supply that eradicated cholera at the turn of the century and really revolutionized people's lives. Now recently the water utilities were sold off with the promise to us as consumers that we would get the necessary investment in the infrastructure because of the sale to the private sector. That hasn't happened.
Since the privatization of water in the UK, the public was told to boil water to protect their health. Water prices shot up, and those who could not afford to pay the new rates were cut off.
We've had droughts for the last 2 years in the UK, and consumers in certain parts of the country, especially in Yorkshire, have actually been reduced to queuing up in the streets to get water from water tankers. They've had to have water imported. And the reason for that is that there has been no investment in upgrading reservoirs and in upgrading the leakage from pipes. It's estimated that there are wastes of about 1/3 to 1/4 of all water. And now the water companies are coming to government and saying, we need subsidies in order to make the necessary investment. It's too big for us. We have to protect our shareholders. We don't want to make this investment. And frankly, to the ordinary consumer, that smacks of hypocrisy.
Since the early part of the century, the facilities that treat water have been owned and run by the public sector. The water itself is a public asset owned by us all. As the infrastructure, the pipes, the treatment facilities get older and start to deteriorate, a crack in the public structure opens up, like the hole in the dike, and the private sector puts in its thumb and lays claim to providing a solution.
Low-income people in Canada, in Ontario particularly, are already facing a great deal of hardship. Water is a fundamental need of human beings. It is, in fact, a duty of governments to ensure that all citizens, all residents have access to basic needs of life. Our concern was that once water becomes a commodity and it's sold at a price, most low-income people would immediately be unable to afford it. I don't want to fill up a jug from a public washroom and hope that it's clean enough for my kids to, drink or have their food cooked in. So we know that in other jurisdictions, when water has been privatized, people were forced to fill up buckets in rivers, go to public washrooms, that disease increased dramatically.
I think, first of all, municipalities should be holding provincial and federal governments to account, because they do have a responsibility to assist municipalities in providing that kind of basic infrastructure.
Municipalities have been starved for cash to renew their aging sewage and treatment facilities by other levels of government, and now face some tough challenges.
For municipalities, when they do contract out their systems to private operators, basically give away their right to control policy in the operation of the system to the private companies.
That loss of control to the private sector will compromise our ability to deal with environmental problems. Added to the equation is the deregulation of environmental controls and a new emphasis on self-regulation.
Experience of citizens groups all across this country is that you cannot trust companies to monitor themselves. It only works if there are vigilant provincial people out there making sure that they live up to the promises that they made.
The very first sewage treatment plant where there was a public-private partnership arrangement was the Hamilton Wentworth sewage treatment plant. Pretty soon after that arrangement was in place, there was a quite large incident where there was thousands of gallons of raw sewage that bypassed the system and flooded basements and polluted the harbor. Unfortunately, the partnership arrangement between the public and the private sector interests left all the liability with the public, i.e. you and I. So our taxpayers' money not only paid initially for what should have been good sewage treatment, but it's now paying for the municipality to sue its partner, Phillip Environmental, in order to recover some of the costs of the cleanup.
The facility is a total mess. They're totally ignoring the union contract. They don't care about us as employees. As far as I'm concerned, it's probably the worst thing that ever happened to us going into the private sector.
Usually the myth of privatization is that competition is good, but really what you're seeing is not necessarily competition, but building of cartels. And our public money's being used to form these large cartels.
The citizens of Montreal faced the possibility of a privatized municipal water system and organized a coalition to oppose it.
That coalition was set up with councillors, with unions, with environmental groups and all that. We went to the Minister of the Municipal Affairs and we provoked him and said, well, you should say no to privatization. We also did a big show in Montreal at the University of Quebec in Montreal, and that show was so well mediatized and have so much impact on the public opinion that the government have to think about it. And then the minister say, well, I think we shouldn't privatize. So it's really local opposition that makes the difference.
In Nanaimo, British Columbia, CUPE 401's prompt action defeated an attempt to privatize the regional treatment facility. Despite offers by the company to pay higher wages, the union was clear.
Other jurisdictions were starting to get a little concerned too, once these companies came in here with the amount of money that they were willing to throw around to try to get their deal through, to negotiate with the affected locals and things like that. It was pretty scary. So we went to the membership, called a closed meeting of our membership up, and we got a unanimous vote against going down the slippery slope.
From St. John's on the Atlantic coast to municipalities in the Greater Toronto Area to coastal communities in British Columbia, the private sector is making big efforts to get a piece of the action. The Canadian Union of Public Employees is sponsoring the creation of Water Watch committees across Canada. Bringing together local union activists and community allies, these committees will oppose any move to control water for profit. And they will mobilize support for public funding to ensure an adequate supply of fresh, clean water and proper wastewater treatment. The struggle to keep water public will be fought and won on the ground in communities across the country. All around the world, unions, environmental and citizen groups are determined to keep water in public hands.